Curiosity. I have made all possible inquiry with respect to the Frisick language, and find that it has been less cultivated than any other of the northern dialects, a certain proof of which is their deficiency of books. Of the old Frisick there are no remains, except some ancient laws preserved by Scotanus in his Beschrijvinge van die Heerlijkheid van Friesland, and his Historica Frisica. I have not yet been able to find these books. Professor Trotz, who formerly was of the University of Vranyken in Friesland, and is at present preparing an edition of all the Frisick laws, gave me this information. Of the modern Frisick, or what is spoken by the Boers at this day, I have procured a specimen. It is Gisbert Japix's Rimellery, which is the only book that they have. It is amazing that they have no translation of the Bible, no treatises of devotion, nor even any of the ballads and story books which are so agreeable to country people. You shall have Japix by the first convenient opportunity. I doubt not to pick up Scotanus. Mynheer Trotz has promised me his assistance. 1764. Aitat 55. Early in 1764 Johnson paid a visit to the Langton family, at their seat of Langton in Lincolnshire, where he passed some time much to his satisfaction. His friend, Bennet Langton, it will not be doubted, did everything in his power to make the place agreeable to so illustrious a guest, and the elder Mr. Langton and his lady, being fully capable of understanding his value, were not wanting in attention. He, however, told me that old Mr. Langton, though a man of considerable learning, had so little allowance to make for his occasional laxity of talk, that because in the course of discussion he sometimes mentioned what might be said in favour of the peculiar tenets of the Romish Church, he went to his grave believing him to be of that communion. Johnson, during his stay at Langton, had the advantage of a good library, and saw several gentlemen of the neighbourhood. I have obtained from Mr. Langton the following particulars of this period. He was now fully convinced that he could not have been satisfied with a country living, for, talking of a respectable clergyman in Lincolnshire, he observed, "This man, sir, fills up the duties of his life well. I approve of him, but could not imitate him." To a lady who endeavoured to vindicate herself from blame for neglecting social attention to worthy neighbours, by saying, "I would go to them if it would do them any good," he said, "What good, madam, do you expect to have in your power to do them? It is showing them respect, and that is doing them good." So socially accommodating was he, that once when Mr. Langton and he were driving together in a coach, and Mr. Langton complained of being sick, he insisted that they should go out and sit on the back of it in the open air, which they did; and being sensible how strange the appearance must be, observed that a countryman whom they saw in a field would probably be thinking, "If these two madmen should come down, what would become of me?" Soon after his return to London, which was in February, was founded that club which existed long without a name, but at Mr. Garrick's funeral became distinguished by the title of the Literary Club. Sir Joshua Reynolds had the merit of being the first proposer of it, to which Johnson acceded, and the original members were Sir Joshua Reynolds, Dr. Johnson, Mr. Edmund Burke, Dr. Nugent, Mr. Beauclerk, Mr. Langton, Dr. Goldsmith, Mr. Chamier, and Sir John Hawkins. They met at the Turk's Head in Gerrard Street, Soho, one evening in every week, at 7, and generally continued their conversation till a pretty late hour. This club has been gradually increased to its present number, 35. After about 10 years, instead of supping weekly, it was resolved to dine together once a fortnight, during the meeting of Parliament. Their original tavern having been converted into a private house, they moved first to Prince's in Sackville Street, then to Letellier's in Dover Street, and now meet at Parslow's, St. James's Street. Between the time of its formation and the time at which this work is passing through the press, June 1792, the following persons now dead were members of it: Mr. Dunning, afterwards Lord Ashburton, Mr. Samuel Dyer, Mr. Garrick, Dr. Shipley Bishop of St. Asaph, Mr. Vesey, Mr. Thomas Wharton, and Dr. Adam Smith. The present members are Mr. Burke, Mr. Langton, Lord Charlemont, Sir Robert Chambers, Dr. Percy Bishop of Dromore, Dr. Barnard Bishop of Killaloe, Dr. Marley Bishop of Clonfert, Mr. Fox, Dr. George Fordyce, Sir William Scott, Sir Joseph Banks, Sir Charles Bunbury, Mr. Wyndham of Norfolk, Mr. Sheridan, Mr. Gibbon, Sir William Jones, Mr. Coleman, Mr. Stevens, Dr. Burney, Dr. Joseph Wharton, Mr. Malone, Lord Ossory, Lord Spencer, Lord Lucan, Lord Palmerston, Lord Eliot, Lord Macartney, Mr. Richard Burke, Junior, Sir William Hamilton, Dr. Warren, Mr. Courtenay, Dr. Hinchcliffe, Bishop of Peterborough, the Duke of Leeds, Dr. Douglas, Bishop of Salisbury, and the writer of this account. Sir John Hawkins represents himself as a seceder from this society, and assigns as the reason of his withdrawing himself from it, that its late hours were inconsistent with his domestic arrangements. In this he is not accurate, for the fact was, that he one evening attacked Mr. Burke in so rude a manner, that all the company testified their displeasure, and at their next meeting his reception was such, that he never came again. He is equally inaccurate with respect to Mr. Garrick, of whom he says, "He trusted that the least intimation of a desire to come among us would procure him a ready admission, but in this he was mistaken. Johnson consulted me upon it, and when I could find no objection to receiving him, exclaimed, 'He will disturb us by his buffoonery,' and afterwards so managed matters that he was never formally proposed, and by consequence never admitted." In justice both to Mr. Garrick and Dr. Johnson, I think it necessary to rectify this misstatement. The truth is, that not very long after the institution of our club, Sir Joshua Reynolds was speaking of it to Garrick. "I like it much," said he; "I think I shall be of you." When Sir Joshua mentioned this to Dr. Johnson, he was much displeased with the actor's conceit. "He'll be of us," said Johnson. "How does he know we will permit him? The first Duke in England has no right to hold such language." However, when Garrick was regularly proposed some time afterwards, Johnson, though he had taken a momentary offence at his arrogance, warmly and kindly supported him, and he was accordingly elected, was a most agreeable member, and continued to attend our meetings to the time of his death. Mrs. Piozzi has also given a similar misrepresentation of Johnson's treatment of Garrick in this particular, as if he had used these contemptuous expressions: "If Garrick does apply, I'll blackball him. Surely one ought to sit in a society like ours, unelbowed by a gamester, pimp, or player." I am happy to be enabled by such unquestionable authority as that of Sir Joshua Reynolds, as well as from my own knowledge, to vindicate at once the heart of Johnson and the social merit of Garrick. In this year, except what he may have done in revising Shakespeare, we do not find that he laboured much in literature. He wrote a review of Granger's Sugar Cane, a Poem, in the London Chronicle. He told me that Dr. Percy wrote the greatest part of this review, but I imagine that he did not recollect it distinctly, for it appears to be mostly, if not altogether, his own. He also wrote in the Critical Review an account of Goldsmith's excellent poem, The Traveller. The ease and independence to which he had at last attained by royal munificence increased his natural indolence. In his Meditations he thus accuses himself: "Good Friday, April 20th, 1764. I have made no reformation. I have lived totally useless, more sensual in thought, and more addicted to wine and meat." And next morning he thus feelingly complains: "My indolence, since my last reception of the sacrament, has sunk into grosser sluggishness, and my dissipation spread into wilder negligence. My thoughts have been clouded with sensuality, and except that from the beginning of this year I have in some measure forborne excess of strong drink, my appetites have predominated over my reason. A kind of strange oblivion has overspread me, so that I know not what has become of the last year, and perceive that incidents and intelligence pass over me without leaving any impression." He then solemnly says, "This is not the life to which heaven is promised," and he earnestly resolves an amendment. It was his custom to observe certain days with a pious abstraction, viz. New Year's Day, the day of his wife's death, Good Friday, Easter Day, and his own birthday. He this year says, "I have now spent 55 years in resolving, having from the earliest time, almost that I can remember, been forming schemes of a better life. I have done nothing. The need of doing, therefore, is pressing, since the time of doing is short. O God, grant me to resolve